The Human Rights Commission is in Gauteng conducting an in-loco inspection in Alexandra, north of Johannesburg, following the July 2021 unrest when the township was severely impacted, forcing many businesses to shut down. More than 350 lives were lost during the unrest, and damage worth more than 50 billion rand was caused to businesses and infrastructure in KwaZulu-Natal and parts of Gauteng. Senior SABC news reporter Chriselda is in Alexandra. We cross live to her now. A very good morning to you, Chriselda. Once again, what's happening where you are?
Well, Desiree, a very good morning to you. These live pictures are from the Stretla informal settlement in Alexandra Township. The Human Rights Commission, of course, on an in-loco inspection today to try and get to, investigate what could have been some of the leading causes of the unrest that we saw in July. Remember that one of the residents or community leaders from Alexandra who testified at the hearings had spoken about, deep-seated socio-economic conditions facing the people of Alexandra, which could have possibly led to the large numbers of people that we see or we had seen participate in the unrest itself. While indeed we've heard at the hearings that started in Gauteng just over a week ago now that some of the conditions or reasons that led to the unrest that started in KwaZulu-Natal was after, of course, the Constitutional Court had handed down its judgment saying basically that the former President Jacob Zuma should be jailed. Then the violence spread from KwaZulu-Natal, you'd remember, to Gauteng. One of the areas that was affected was Alexandra Township. A bit earlier on, before we came here to Stretla, we'd gone to one of the hostels where the Human Rights Commission had spoken to one of the induna there, who basically said they were not affected by the violence, but what happened was that some of the businesses around the area, and that's what we saw at the Pan-Africa Mall, Desiree, where we were a bit earlier on this morning. That's where some of the damage was. We heard from a police officer who responded to the scene there. He spoke about how one of his colleagues had been shot at, how he was injured. So the Human Rights Commission really trying to get to the crux before it compiles a report at the end of these hearings of what were some of the conditions, in addition to what we've heard, that may have contributed towards the violence that we saw. I want to bring in Gushwell Brooks now, who's with the Human Rights Commission. He's been the spokesperson for these hearings. Gushwell, a very good morning to you. Thanks indeed for your time. So is the Human Rights Commission satisfied at this point that where you've been so far and in speaking to people of Alexandra, you're getting a sense of some of the contributing factors to what happened in July?
Good morning, and yes, indeed. I think apart from the contributing factors to the July 2021 unrest, I mean, it's horrible to see people living under some of these conditions. I mean, we've been, as you mentioned, we've been to the hostel earlier. We just walked through this informal settlement. You look at the fact that this river running through it is, there's trash, there's pollution, and all kinds of things. And people are using some of this water, even the conditions, the living conditions that people have, where you have port-to-lose that people have to use, that, none of us would be willing to use. It's quite horrific to see people living under these conditions, and I think there should be an eye-opening moment for all of us.
Yeah. But I think what we're seeing here is nothing new, Gushwell. There'd been an inquiry into Alex that painted a horrible picture of the conditions here. Nothing seems to have changed. Is the Human Rights Commission concerned that in areas such as this, and we heard this in the hearings, where one of the community leaders spoke about socio-economic conditions like what we're seeing now, which could have largely contributed to how many people went out and started participating in the looting because they're simply hungry?
It is deeply concerning, and I think that ultimately what we need to understand is that there's an onus on all levels of society to deal with the socio-economic inequalities that we have. Of course, it is our responsibility to protect, try to enforce these rights, also to monitor these rights, to make sure that we have a handle and an understanding of what the situation is that people are living under. But simultaneously, whether it be the private sector, whether it be the state itself, whether it be civil society, ultimately, and I hope this doesn't fall on deaf ears, but ultimately something needs to be done about this situation. It's very true what you're saying. This is nothing new to us. We're nearly 30 years into this democracy, and we can't have a situation where people live under these conditions and then simultaneously we're shocked at the events that we saw last year in July.
Any update on whether President Cyril Ramaphosa will appear before the Commission before the hearings wrap up? Is he coming?
I hate to say it, at this stage I can't give any confirmation on that. As I said, there's numerous witnesses that still need to appear, definitely state officials, members of civil society. I also mentioned that members of the media themselves will be appearing. But as we go along, we will definitely keep everyone abreast of who is appearing and when.
All right, we'll certainly wait to hear about that. Let's just take you a bit this way. I'll ask my colleague Kwazimanzi to move with us towards this direction. This is part of the bridge that links between one side of the Stretla to the other. One of the areas of concern that have been raised, you would recall, even in that inquiry into Alexandra Township, where it was found that the conditions that residents live in here are issues where, not surprisingly, many would say, would spark, be that spark, where people would get involved in looting the malls that we have seen affected here in Alexandra Township. This every time, you'd recall, Desiree, every single time there is heavy rains in Johannesburg, this is one of the first places you would come to where you would find heavy flooding, where people have built their shacks right on the banks of the Yukske River here. So definitely of concern. And what would be interesting to see is what the Human Rights Report will say. We're waiting to hear if the President of the country, Cyril Ramaphosa, will appear before these hearings. Remember that he had also instituted a panel, an expert panel, to look into whether law enforcement agencies had also, dealt with the violence in a manner which it was supposed to. Also here in Alexandra this morning, fortunately, one of the people that was interviewed by the Human Rights Commission was a police officer who had responded to the scene, where he spoke about how his colleague had been shot, how he was also injured. So this, nothing new what we're seeing here, Desiree, but whether, reports like this from the Human Rights Commission would obviously, give an indication of what were some of those contributing factors that led to the July violence, in addition to what we've heard from here, Desiree, at about 12 o'clock at noon today. We're also expected to hear from the chief of the South African National Defence Force, Rudzani Mapwanya. Recall that his testimony had to be postponed last time in order to accommodate him today as a result of some of the communications challenges. But the hearings themselves really trying to speak to both politicians and those on the ground that would have experienced and heard exactly what could have led to those to that unrest back in July. So at 12 o'clock, we're expecting the chief of the SANDF to take the stand. That will be in Sandton. So we will move from here after the conversations that the commissioners have had with residents here in Alexandra Township. In Soweto as well, we also heard one of the community members had also taken the stand from Soweto, who also painted a grim picture, saying that in places like Soweto, you aren't able to tell whether it is during the week or during the weekend, because people are always loitering the streets. There's simply no employment. And what we've also seen here, Desiree, is that so many months later, after the cleanup operations are done, is that one of the malls, Pan Africa Mall, that was attacked and looted during the unrest, it hasn't yet recovered. There are some shops that have not yet opened, which means that it contributes to already the existing crisis that the country has of job losses and unemployment, where some of those shop owners probably decided they're not going to reopen, or they simply don't have the resources to do so, or think that it's simply not worth it opening up in certain areas that had been destroyed, because there'd been quite, in addition to the number of lives lost, over 300, there's really been significant damage that has been done to some of the shopping malls that were looted. We understand from the experts lost there about 50 billion is what we heard from some of the experts, including from Business Unity South Africa's Cascovadia, who had testified yesterday as well.
Thank you so much for bringing us up to speed. We'll endeavour to take you live to the testimony of General Rudzani Mapwanya. Let's take a quick break as we chase the top of the next hour.